digitaljamsessions.com.
Hello and welcome to this Digital Jam session. Today we're joined by a group of alumni digital jammers, and those include Imre from Bossa Studios, Amelia, who is now at Havas, Dennis, who is from X.ai, we have Joe from W Communications, and Phil Harris from, where am I saying you're from? One Thumb?
One Thumb Mobile.
One Thumb. Just checking. Okay, so would you lovely folks like to remind our listeners of exactly who you are and what you do in your respective companies? And I'm going to start with you, Joe, because you have definitely changed company since you was last on the show.
I have. So my name is Joe Barnes. I am currently the head of digital at W Communications. That basically means I focus mostly on how we can improve the consumer experience from a digital perspective across our client roster.
Wonderful, thank you. And Amelia, I know that you also have had a change since you last joined us as a regular on the show. Why don't you tell everybody what you're up to with Havas?
Yeah, so I recently joined Havas as Innovations Manager for 18 Hubs, which is an organization that sits horizontally but also vertically within Havas, which means that we have global headquarters across the world, people working on innovation, meaning working closer with startups, but also boosting innovation within Havas. So we have a wide network that connects with each other, but we can also, push throughout Havas company, which is huge in comparison, especially to startup measures, and try to figure things out, how we can be more startup-y,
Wonderful, thank you. And Imre, why don't you tell us all about what you're up to with Bossa Studios?
Hi, I am one of the founders of Bossa Studios. We make video games, and we are working on a wicked good video game called Words Adrift. Check it out. It is awesome.
And we will include the link to that in the podcast notes. And Phil, why don't you tell us more about what you do with One Thumb?
Hi, I'm Phil. I am the senior content designer with One Thumb Mobile. I concentrate more on narrative and writing, quests and details and complexities and canon, and making sure that the whole world works around us. Not this world, the world of Celtic Heroes, which is the game that our company creates.
Wonderful. You are a world builder. And Dennis, why don't you tell us more about what you're doing with X.ai?
So we spent the last almost 3 years, come this August, September, in trying to create this intelligent agent that can set up meetings. So that when Tanya and I are supposed to meet in downtown Manhattan, we can simply just ask Amy to go set that up for us. And she'll have these very human-like conversations or negotiations really with the individual participants to the extent where we can agree and have the whole thing set up. Just like if you hired a human to sit in your front office.
Thank you very much. And congratulations, Dennis, on the recent funding round, I might add.
Money is always good.
Indeed. Congratulations. That was a very impressive round.
It was indeed.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And Imre has had the experience of Amy. In fact, he's the only person that wanted to openly abuse Amy.
I did.
I will come hunt you down. She is a lovely person. And we need to treat her nice.
He wanted to play with her. I think that's mostly because he's from the games industry. But I am going to open up our conversation for today's session. And that is really looking at the future use of AI within the entertainment industry. Now, that's not to say that the AI isn't already being utilized. But what I do think is probably worth discussing initially is actually this phrase of AI, artificial intelligence, and actually what it really means. Because a lot of people, when you talk about AI, there is this connotation of something quite complex and almost human-like in its intelligence, or perhaps better than human-like in its intelligence. And we forget that there are other types of AI and what we would sometimes call weak or loose AI. And I am curious, Dennis, if you would be good enough to open with an explanation, really, of the differences between these types of AI, because I do think it is quite important that we first establish exactly what it means rather than just assume this rather complex meaning.
It's a good question, isn't it? Because if you, like me, has spent the last 20 years in tech, whatever we used to define AI as have changed. So what it was yesterday is not what it is today, and what it is today is certainly not what it's going to be tomorrow. But I do like at least the idea of creating kind of two segments. The one kind of philosophical debate of us potentially as a race being able to create this entity which is equal intelligent to that of humans, and we can call that AI in its original thought. And then I think we can talk about any other version of that, whether loose or weak or any other moniker you would apply to it, for where we're trying to do a job that would otherwise be done by a human, whether that be setting up a meeting or having some agent in a game take a set of actions that would otherwise be your friend. So I certainly like those two segments. And the first one of us trying to create something which is at human levels is probably still going to be a fantasy. And even I, who spent my life in tech, just can't even imagine us ever getting there. So those are the two that we certainly look at. And when we look at Amy, she is, by any definition, a narrow AI. She does this one thing, but she's extremely intelligent about that one thing. But she wouldn't be able to have any feelings for who won the Premier League or what that meant.
Okay. So having established the groundwork of what exactly we mean when we say AI, because we're not talking about some all-encompassing deep mind style, complex artificial intelligence that can do multiple things at once, but something that is very much dedicated to a singular purpose or task. Ideally, the facilitation of something or just to, I suppose, cut corners might be a phrase one would use. How that would apply currently within the entertainment industries. So I'm going to ask you this, Imre. In your experiences as a game studio or as somebody within the games industry, what examples would you give of something that is currently utilizing weak AI?
Wow, that is a big question. The challenge is always that, again, with the definition of AI, because the AI starts very, very dumb and almost automated and goes all the way to super intelligent systems. I think that in gaming, at the moment, the real AI is very limited. We use certain aspects of AI for entities in a game universe to figure out where to go and how to get there. We use AI, for example, in an action game to make tactical choices. Should I use my gun or should I throw a grenade? We also use some very, very loose AI to analyze player behavior and based on that, try to give you back some sort of an adapted content. But already I am more in territory of automated systems rather than AI. It is actually, I think, going to be the next couple of years when we are going to see true AI really break through into gaming and we using less smokes and mirrors and brute force and more AI in video games.
Okay, so Phil, this one I'm kind of going to throw at you because you're more interested in kind of the narrative design, so to speak. And so when we talk about emergent narrative, which is really this idea that the audience is in control or it's a more of a collaborative storytelling format and structure, do you think that there is application here for weak AI in that context, or even perhaps slightly more complex AI, given that it is essentially a hive mind that is creating the narrative?
Not at the moment. I agree with Imre's classification of the uses of AI within games, and that extends to narrative within games as well. There's just at this point in time, just in the last month, we had an AI computer that beat grandmasters at Go. Now, Go was seen to be one of the most complex games in the world due to the massive facets of playing that game. And that's sort of the first step towards an AI producing some type of narrative flow and some type of narrative connection. But as Dennis mentioned, there is the whole problem with emotion, the emotive nature of things, how people approach that narrative when it's being expressed and what they feel that narrative means to them. And having this artificial intelligence being able to prescribe what that emotion will be for that single person to give them the right response is a massively, massively complex thing. But for just moving around bulk of data, and I think one of the things which is often badly worded in the games industry is that we have artificial intelligence to do that. It isn't realistically artificial intelligence at this time. It's a whole bunch of programmed steps which characters and non-player characters and things like this follow.
So it's more of an automated process, really, than necessarily AI. And so that brings me to you, Dennis, in as much as as you know, as my listeners know by now, I use Amy, and anybody who's been fortunate enough to have a meeting with me will know that they, are encountering Amy. But one person who did respond to me today in a meeting when I mentioned, by the way, Amy isn't actually human, as I like to do sometimes on occasion. And he said, do you know what? I was kind of suspicious because she didn't have a sense of humour. And that it wasn't that she didn't respond in a good way or that she wasn't answering the questions or doing something particularly obvious that kind of gave the game away so much as the fact that she didn't respond to his jokes. So I'm curious, Dennis, at what point do we get to a stage where artificial intelligence can simulate these human emotions, these things that Imre has kind of pointed out are not really present at the moment when we look at some forms of this AI, and yet we have companies in Japan, for example, making decisions such as hiring or placing an AI in charge of their creative department of the creative agency. I'm curious how we get from these linear decision-making kind of yes and no's of data to something that really does mimic human emotion.
I think there's certainly a few items that you can decide for when you go create one of these agents. And what we hear the most often is that it would be lovely if you had a handful of different iterations of Amy. I need the very formal version. I need the very relaxed version. I need the one void of humor or the one that is just absolutely funny. And those are all kind of good ideas. I'm not so sure that's the path we want to pursue, though. I would much rather that we pursue a path for where she can pick up the sentiment of the individual negotiation. Because it could be that I am extremely formal with my counsel when we try to close a new Series B financing. And in those 2 weeks, it's all business. But it could also be that the exact same person where I'm setting up another meeting 4 weeks later, it is something where it's slightly more casual. And he should be able to pick up on that. That said, we created one formal, still slightly casual version of Amy right now, where no matter how much humor you add into the conversation, she will try to kind of bring it back on track. I would like to kind of just mention a few items for where we're starting to inject emotion into the dialogue. I'll just give you one example here, and I think it's a good example, where if you use Amy to set up a meeting with me, or say Phil asked to have a meeting set up with me in Manhattan, and we're supposed to meet up first week of June on Monday at 2 o'clock. Then I write Phil, CC and Amy and say, hey, Phil, I got to push it 2 hours. Are you cool with that? He says, yes. Then I email Amy again and say, hey, can we push it another half hour? And then I email him for a third time saying, we're going to cancel and move it to next week. At some point here, even though Amy is still doing the work I'm asking her to do, the whole thing became just unfortunate, to say the least. She needs to understand that we went from her just doing a job to some new setting for where she needs to understand that even though I'm asking now Phil for the 4th time, I need to show Phil that I'm not just completely robotic. So we actually inject emotion into this for where she becomes a little bit sorry about this new unfortunate setting. And we can actually see an impact of that because we can measure whether the probability of us still doing the meeting is staying the same, increase or decrease. And we can see, and you might not even have noticed, that she'll even in the end kind of apologize on your behalf. And that's interesting. Even though that the other party is now fully aware of the fact that this is a machine, and where the machine obviously doesn't have any full understanding of emotion, but just by the fact that it is visible and it's not robotic and you're just looping around and setting up the meeting for the 4th time, the fact that it is recognized is unfortunate. That just creates for a better environment for where we're more likely to do the meeting. That I find absolutely fascinating. And we're starting to kind of inject that level of emotion into kind of multiple places in the system.
Interesting, because I did notice that she started to say things like, unfortunately, and I'm sorry. I wasn't quite sure what that was about. But yeah.
That is probably because you're not tardy and you do all your meetings on time.
I do.
On first schedule. Yes.
Yes,
but
I
for
do.
other people.
Yes. I'm curious from your perspective, Amelia, when you are looking at the use of these types of slightly more complex, shall we say, artificial intelligence to make decisions, is it something that you believe is the right thing necessarily for clients who are working with people like Havas to necessarily begin to look at ways to actually start to integrate. I'm gonna call them artificial agents rather than AIs, because I don't think that the AI is really the right phrase here. But artificial agents who are able to start to pick up some of the slack, so to speak, between these different companies, and especially in agency environments. I'm curious whether or not you believe that there is an application for artificial agents in the context of agencies.
I think that for sure there is room, and I think it's going to be very interesting as we start incorporating them in, the day-to-day stuff. Most have been around the context of, streamlining processes, having a bot within Slack to kind of pick up the pieces, pick up the processes, having artificial intelligence look at the data and produce a report in Word, so nobody has to do the boring stuff anymore. And I think, that's like the promised land. People get a little bit more uneasy when we try to mix in artificial intelligence and creative processes.
Interesting.
Because people want to feel that, okay, machines can do the boring stuff, but I'm still in the control because I am the creative mind. But it's been interesting. So now, only I think yesterday or a day before was the Met Gala.
Yes.
And the theme of the gala was machine and man. And we saw a lot of interesting kind of, tech-related stuff as well. And I think the most interesting one was a dress designed by artificial intelligence for a New York socialite. And I think that was an interesting project. That was something very interesting to see what came out and the response people had and press like Vogue had to that experiment.
It's interesting that you mentioned this, because there were some other really interesting dresses that emerged from the Met Gala that are worth recognizing, in as much as the first cognitive dress was worn at the Met Gala last night, I believe it was. People will just focus on the fact that it lit up. What they won't be recognizing is that it lit up in response to the social sentiment of her fans. And so it was lighting up in different ways, depending on what the fans were doing. So I do think that it's interesting to note that it is becoming this thing that people are beginning to understand how they can begin to incorporate this into other areas, such as fashion.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. I mean, like only today I saw this morning a tweet and it had almost identical logos as Airbnb, Beats, which was Fleetboard, and another one, and Medium logo, and they were identical, but they weren't the logos of Medium, Airbnb. They were logos from like back in the 70s that somebody had done for completely different, were almost identical logos. And a lot of times we say, when it comes to creation, there's nothing new. In fashion, there's so much fast-paced production that you see all the head of creatives, essentially quitting their jobs because they can't be creative at that pace. Whereas an algorithm could be creative at that pace. The problem is, I agree with the guys when they said, there are some limitations when it comes to being creative as an algorithm. I mean, there are certain things that repeat themselves, like in storytelling, there are, I think, 12. There is a finite numbers of core storylines of archetypes that just, we recycle them from the ancient Greeks to Shakespeare to Survivor today. There are certain archetypes and certain elements within storytelling that you just have to combine and come up with a new story. So in this sense, because we recycle some elements and we can build new stuff using certain things, there is room for artificial intelligence to come in. What we can replace, I think, with artificial intelligence is the unpredictability of humans that can sometimes be not so productive, but it is what makes stuff interesting most of the time. So, for instance, Survivor is a series, same storylines, the same things happen. They have gone way beyond the 10th season in US, and still it's a cliffhanger every episode, because it is the people that they cast and the way that they do casting that switches things up. So I think, for us, moving forward with artificial intelligence, the interesting part won't be just having artificial intelligence isolated to do its own stuff and us doing our own stuff. The interesting part will come when we start collaborating with artificial intelligence.
Okay, so last mention in terms of the Met Gala, I'm going to just say shout out to Emma Watson for her outfit as well, which was outstanding. Although it wasn't necessarily as techy in some respects, it was certainly scoring high on the recycling and just being very aware of sourcing. But Joe, I'm going to throw this out to you now because I think it's interesting what Amalia says in terms of this idea of collaboration with AI. And I think that's part of why this agency in Japan, this creative agency in Japan, decided to utilize this AI to make decisions about their campaigns. Was this idea of collaboration, of teamwork as such. Maybe it's a little bit scary to put the AI in charge of everything to make the key decisions, but certainly interesting to have an AI who's able to think at a pace or to at least make decisions at a pace that is perhaps beyond, somebody who is truly creative, who might like a little bit more time to think about these things. So I'm interested, Joe, from your perspective, about this idea of collaboration with AI.
I think there's a couple of things that, in my mind, play into the collaboration aspect, and that's if it seems from that perspective, AI is slightly more about being a solution looking for a problem as opposed to about an experience that's being improved by the advancements of AI. My personal view is that some of the advancements which you're doing, Dennis, and at the forefront of are fascinating in being able to help make experiences better and solve those problems for people in a sense where it's almost a seamless. It's hard to identify that it's AI because it's making the experience so much better and making the problem irrelevant in a sense. So the collaboration aspect for me has to be quite specific and quite focused on a problem, as opposed to, I suppose, you only really get to understand the advancements once you have the ability to play with it and experiment with it, like perhaps the agency in Japan has. I don't know the background of it. For me, in terms of developing creativity and nurturing the creativity which feeds the decisions which create fantastic work from an agency perspective, I would worry a little bit about relying on certain aspects of that being driven from an AI. But I'm also, in the same sentence, quite excited at the fact that how that could complement with the right balance, the right ingredients of intelligence, but with human emotion and creativity intertwined with it. It could create some brilliant results. And I've not seen what the results have been. Have you been aware or been across what the results are from that collaboration in Japan? Have you? Or
I think they've only recently appointed this person, or this thing. I don't know. Do you call an AI a person or not, Dennis?
So if you went to x.ai/love notes, I think what you'll see is not just thousands of people who like Amy, but I think you'll see two things. One, that somehow in whatever we created here, we moved away from it, software, application, to him, her, she, and that is just, to me at least, absolutely fascinating. There's this entity here for where we are not trying to fool people into believe that we've got 10,000 people employed in the Philippines. We're very open about the fact that we are a machine learning company. But still, even with that, people will say she. And that, I think, is just astonishing. And I think that is just the beginning of how we might just think of these agents. And we think of this as an intelligent agent. Not one for where I need to fool you into believe it's a human, but one for where I tell you it's a machine, but I want you to treat it like a human. So that's certainly what we've seen. And then the way they talk about whether that be something positive or something negative is in human terms. She did a good job, not as in Excel calculated the row I wanted added up correctly or the two columns for the chart came out as expected. No, she did a good job, or she was slightly delayed to respond to my question. Those are funny things to say about a piece of software, but we've certainly seen that the whole narrative kind of change towards something that is much more human-like.
It's interesting that we're getting into this conversation about kind of the humanity, if you like, of artificial intelligence, or that idea of an artificial person or personality. I remember a long time ago, and you'll only get this if you're a geek and know this if you're a geek. There used to be this TV show called Time Cop. Before there was a movie with Jean-Claude Van Damme, there was a TV show, and it had this detective who travelled back in time, but in the future he had this computer that was essentially on his credit card. That was a female detective, and she essentially helped him to solve various crimes. And as we move forward, in other types of sci-fi narrative, we've seen things like RoboCop with another artificial intelligence running the city. Being able to calculate the needs of the city in terms of hospitals, in terms of police, in terms of all these things, that it's essentially moving us around as humans and letting us know what we need to be doing in order to facilitate the way that we live our lives. And I am curious that we're getting to that stage now in the kind of place where we are culturally, that we're ready to potentially accept the idea of artificial intelligence and artificial agents as these people that we do need to interact with. And I'm curious, just from your perspective on this one, Imre, because I know that you love all things sci-fi, so you've probably got all of those references, whether or not you really see this as being that thing that, I know that Dennis has a vision that he's mentioned several times on this show now of artificial agents really being integrated with our life. So thinking about something like a Siri integrating with multiple artificial agents who have a narrow focus to do individual things, on the top of which sits somebody like Siri, who then facilitates for us with this whole array of other workings underneath the bonnet, so to speak. And I'm curious, Imre, from your perspective, how you feel about this idea of having additional people in our lives that are artificial, but are genuinely people that we interact with and feel that they are, they are individuals. They're he, they're a she, they're a people that we interact with.
But first of all, I think Dennis is onto something. Though it's worth mentioning that the history of sci-fi is not on his side. It's
always the evil AI, right?
Exactly, like one way or the other, there will be a conflict. The challenge is that as far as the society's reaction go, at the moment it's a cool gadget, right? At the moment it is just something that a selected few enjoy, and we find it cool or interesting or whatever. But it didn't disrupt our lives to the level where it would create a shock. Just wait a couple of months after self-driving cars put a couple of thousands, if not tens of thousands, or maybe even hundreds of thousands of people out of job, because pretty much all of the truck drivers will lose their jobs. When that happens, suddenly there will be a very different reaction to what an AI can and cannot do. I do believe that they will have the personalities, and it's already being proven increasingly by semi or fully automated customer support and other types of chatbots. I think everyone is pushing in this direction, and this is going to be the future. But it is yet to be seen that how society will react. One quick comment I would add, however, to mention back earlier what was said. The separation is really simple. At the moment, AI cannot do a creative job, full stop. Like, I cannot take anyone seriously who thinks otherwise, and I can explain why. Because at the moment, AI can only do what they were programmed to do. They can beat us in complexity of managing data and the speed of managing data and all that, but ultimately they cannot create something new. They can repurpose old, and that is extremely powerful either in creative fields. But at the moment, for now, they could not replace human creativity. Will that be the case in 10 years or 50 years? Now, that I don't know. But up until now, creative people are safe, but we yet to see if that remains that way.
Can I just add 2 cents to that? Not to start a fight at
No, throw it in there, Dennis.
EST.
Come on, make it interesting.
I do think that what you suggest is some point in the future is somewhat happening right now. So if you go look at all the commentary around the Go game that we saw short of 2 months ago, there's a whole methodology for how you best go apply your tactics and strategies in Go. And the DeepMind version actually came up with a whole new host of potential moves that just aren't being taught as that's what you're supposed to do. And I'm not so sure if that is not defined as creativity. So humans just wouldn't play like that. The machine did, though. So if that did that, that might just be, given it's one, something for where we will start to teach people that as being a good way to go play Go. So I think we're seeing it already.
Okay.
That is a fair point.
Okay. Back away slowly.
Can I just add something as well? From your conversations, it's quite interesting. I think focusing on the role of what the intelligence may be playing in the agency context to facilitate creativity, I think it's perfectly feasible for what's going to be happening in Japan to be a huge success if the role of the AI is about occupying task, which is facilitating people to have more time or a greater capacity to be creative and therefore enhance creativity. So an indirect positive result as opposed to a direct positive result that you Dennis and Emre are both talking about.
I totally take on board both of all of your points. But what I am going to do is just add on very briefly to Dennis's point as well, which is to say that the definition of creative or this notion of capability of creative thinking, I think is one we have to be very careful about defining, because when we think about the idea of something like innovation, for example, or insight, these are essentially looking at things in a new way, taking existing methodologies and reframing them, or adapting the way that we think. And that is something that is happening within AI at the moment. And I do think it is something that, for example, we've seen robots that are learning how to walk. Well, if the robot started up without knowing how to walk, but has essentially taught itself how to do that, then it is in essence creatively thinking. It is digesting that information and applying different tactics and different processes to the notion of movement until it is able to actually walk. So
the difference is, sorry to interrupt, the difference is that the robot didn't come up with that. Someone programmed it with the algorithm which allowed it to take every single data point which it experienced and evolve its own walking simulation. So I think there is still the human hand is there, and I think that's a very important thing to note.
Well, I think certainly that there is definitely some room for scope when it comes to creative thinking. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to twist this conversation sideways, and I'm going to continue to use old film analogies here. So I'm going to point back to an old film called Demolition Man, which some of you may or may not remember. And in this film, it was quite it was the future of Los Angeles, and there'd been a big earthquake, and there's all this wonderful new technology. And in this new police department that Sandra Bullock was working in, when somebody called up, you had a human operator answering the phone, going through the process, and essentially saying something to the effect of, "If you would like to speak to a robot, press 1. If you would like me to stop talking to you as a human being, just press 1." And it was interesting that there was this kind of suggestion that in the future, people don't want to necessarily have human interaction. They want to continue with this simplistic and streamlined process that they know is efficient. And I am curious because I do see that there is this evolution, if you like, in terms of society and the way that we as individuals operate, certainly in cities. We are very isolationist. We do like to just get on with things. And sure, we go to specific places for social interaction. But actually, when it comes to our own individual lives and our own individual homes, we do like to just get on with it. And I'm curious maybe what your thoughts are on this in terms of where you see this going and whether or not you see the idea of artificial agent or the idea of any kind of technology really being able to facilitate these kind of isolationist bubbles that we've placed ourselves in as individuals.
It does hold some truth what you said, in a sense, even with texting, we have replaced a lot of verbal communication with other human beings. So, definitely it's easier. It's easier in one way, but it has made our life more difficult in other ways. And sometimes we don't even realize what it is that we're missing that can be like that human touch and that human connection. I do think that in general, like even when we're talking before about the human element and where it stands, like even if all jobs are replaced by artificial intelligence and all that. So for instance, like in fashion, we can input all the data that we currently have on trends and all that, because we do just recycle trends. Like, people cannot be that creative when they're under pressure to be productive at this rate. So a lot of our creativity is not really that creative, and maybe it can be intelligent. So maybe in the future, like the H&Ms and Zara's are all produced by artificial intelligence, and then the haute couture and the high-end fashion is created by humans. So in a sense, I think that can also go within our interactions as well. So it can be a different almost level kind of service and a different level of relationship as well.
Okay, what's your take on that, Joe?
It's a difficult one, because I think, in my mind, it's valuable when it's improving an experience and making something easier. So whether that is, the Uber, the Just Eat, it's removing the communication with the human, but for the reason that it's clarifying a process and making it simpler, which is adding value to an experience. And I think the direction, with the amount of data which is now existing from various different kind of input points, whether it be social networks or hardware improving hugely and integrating better with social networks which are providing a greater level of data, the way which we start to produce and the way that artificial intelligence can produce, as Amelia was just talking about there, I think is going to be, it's exponential in terms of the way that it's growing and how it's starting to develop. I mean, it goes without saying, we're all aware of the imitation game and the way that things have developed ridiculously fast from that point and are growing at a faster pace than ever now. But I think it's slightly less about the isolation and more about making something easier, more efficient and economical. And if that means removing the convolution that can sometimes be involved with human contact, then fine. But then there's still that requirement from the other perspective to have that emotional aspect to things when the output requires it, like exactly what Amelia was talking about there, the kind of the mainstream manufacturing type brands be using an AI to produce, whereas the more established, luxurious, opulent parts, which people want to be a bit more emotionally connected with and pay that extra for, would therefore not have that.
Okay, so I'm going to just ask this question about what you think it is that is going to change significantly, whether this is a cultural shift or a technological shift. What do you think is going to be that big shift that's going to occur in the next 5 or 10 years? I'm going to start with you, Phil.
There's been a lot of interesting points going around. I think there's all this stuff about potentially an infinite number of artificial intelligence with an infinite number of processors producing Hamlet, and I think that will happen one day. It's the fact that the amount of data that's coming in and the amount that the artificial intelligence can process can rarefy down very, very quickly to what people actually found entertaining and what people didn't. And they can do this infinite monkeys thing. They can create a massive amount of data for us to observe and react to, and then really, really quickly react to our own reactions to them. For me, within the games industry, I see entertainment, virtual reality, and all the things that go with it. There's a real chance for a real-time updating of canon, a real-time updating of a living world, so that the world that people experience, that people engage with a few creatives inputting to that from one central point, it's just flowing out, and the artificial intelligence is seeing exactly how that would adapt and manipulate the world around them, so that people who are experiencing it, whether it be through some type of modern film or theatre or through game, actually feel that their actions are having a reaction on the world. They're changing the way that the world operates. You already get that in some interactive experiences, but it would make it so much stronger because you would actually see this physical thing going on. And I think the very interesting thing is to do with the variety of inputs that we have. You've been talking about Amy, which is obviously a voice, but I remember very, very early on in Kinect days, the Microsoft Kinect, Connect, before it was called Connect. They did this test with Milo where the person was integrating with Milo on the screen. And it was a little creepy, but the technology behind it was absolutely fantastic. And you know, that visual connection, what if it's a visual connection, an oral connection, a sense of like touch if you had a seat where it just knew that you were feeling up, tense and uncomfortable, and so it just wrapped around you to make you feel relaxed and like warm inside while you're watching something. If all these things start to integrate together, I think that is the absolute crux, and that would be the amazing thing. That would be the point where it may not be truly creative, as Imre said, but it is something that sort of simulates a certain level of creativity within it.
Okay. And Amalia, what's your thought on that?
I think that the next few years, the biggest conversation and the biggest challenge will be around data. Artificial intelligence is only as good as the input, we need to, and it's greedy, it needs more data in order to improve, to do more. But where does the data come from? I think there's already, been some discussion on, whether that's NHS and releasing medical data to Google, or what happens with the data that is stored from like Nest or Internet of Things devices, and where do they go exactly? What happens with them when the device dies and all that? And up to now, we've been, signing off terms and conditions, thoughtlessly maybe, but I think it's going to be a challenge, especially on a government level, because we definitely need to update the regulations and the legislation around all that and establish some policies. But as we know, can we really be up to speed with that part as artificial intelligence grows exponentially? I don't know. So I think that's going to be a very big challenge for us collectively.
Okay.
To find a good balance with that.
Interesting. And Joe, what's your thoughts on this?
So I think that, touching actually on what Amalia was saying, that the speed of progress isn't matched by the ability to regulate it or to regulate the developments. And for me, that kind of means that there should, unlikely to be, but there needs to be a bit of a cautious approach to make sure that there's no foolish profit-fueled decisions that are being made when there isn't the ability to regulate something which could have quite a huge positive impact on our society, but also quite a detrimental one.
Okay. And Imre, what's your thoughts?
Well, as Stephen Hawking says, that we should be afraid, very, very afraid of AI. And it is my theory that Elon Musk is actually an AI sent back from the future to make us accept AI better. I think we're going to have, you're absolutely right, the earlier comments that we are going to have a challenge as a society and on a political level with people losing their jobs and just social interactions shifting. From the entertainment point of view, I see it better. I think we are going to get creative AI. I don't think we are there yet. Right now, in the next 5 years, to me, it is about customizing things and personalizing things in an intelligent way, where I create a universe, but that universe adapts around that player because it understands that player, because it can process so much data, and because it understands the game so well. Basically creating scope and customization and this kind of intimate, infinite detail into the games, which a human hand simply, purely because of the amount of work needed, it wouldn't be able to do. So from an entertainment point of view, I can't wait. And I guess it's not going to come as a shock to anyone that with Bossa Studio, we have now multiple AI-focused projects ongoing already because of this very reason.
You're always on top of everything, Imre. But Dennis, what's your thought on this?
I think it's going to be this movement really away from the idea of apps being the solution, and I certainly don't dislike the idea of an app helping me doing a task a little bit more accurate, a little bit faster. But I certainly don't see a future where I move from 120 apps on my phone to 240 apps. That doesn't make any sense. But I think there's a future where we have agents doing jobs, not assisting us, but actually doing jobs. Amy, set up this meeting. It's not that I can't figure it out, but you do it. Tommy, arrange my travels. Jenny, make sure that I have my taxes done, or whatever the request might be. And I think what's going to be really exciting is when these agents start to talk amongst each other. And I think that is where creativity will become kind of quite obvious, because I didn't even participate. I just had my scheduling agent reach out to my travel agent, who reached out to my banking agent, and whatever conversation that they had were creative in its own sense. So that's certainly what I see happen in the kind of next half decade. Or I'm betting SoftBank's money on it. So far, so good.
Okay, well, personally, I am hugely excited by the idea of an AI that's going to do taxes. That is definitely something that needs to happen. If anybody is listening and that can make that happen, come on now, make it happen.
I'll have my agent talk to your agent. It's going to be I'll have my lawyer talk to your lawyer.
I love it. Well, guys, thank you all for joining us on this Digital Jam session. And thank you for listening. If you enjoy this content, don't forget to subscribe and review. And I'm going to ask each of you to share with us your social media handle of choice so that our lovely listeners can find out a little bit more about what you're up to and a little bit more about your organizations. And I'm going to start with you, Imre.
Hi, my Twitter handle is Imre Jele, and you can find Bossa Studios, well, everywhere, but at Bossa Studios.
Wonderful, thank you. And Joe?
So the best place to find me would be on Twitter, and my handle is Joe N. Barnes, JoenBarnes.
Wonderful. And the Twitter handle for W Communications?
It's at WComms.
Thank you. And Amelia?
Yeah, you can find me at Amalaki. So AMA and then Lucky as in what a lucky girl. And you can find me as Amalaki pretty much anywhere from Snapchat to Twitter to wherever. And 18 Hubs at 18 Hubs. We'll be looking forward to your tweets.
Wonderful, thank you. And Phil,
you can find me at Philip G. Harris. That's PhilipGharris. And one from mobile, you find us better through at Celtic Heroes.
Wonderful, thank you. And Dennis?
You can find out everything about Amy on the domain x.ai. And I'm on Twitter under the handle at Dennis Mortensen.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Digital Jam Ltd. DigitalJamSessions.com